to make laika!
Yo, what's good, fam? Instrumentality's on that we good again, and we flipping out like the end of my brim, trying to get that good, so I throw in the fin, getting it in, living it win, reminiscing. We could give a fuck about tomorrow's begin, so we at Water Tower till they think that we residents, posted on walls like Facebook messages.
When it comes to the medium of TV, film, or media as a whole, a lot of us forget the whole spectrum of quality that it can offer. There's this big focus on the big 2D versus 3D animation clash, but it really does feel like we live in a world where the art of things like puppetry and stop motion are swept under the rug. And that's a shame too, because as much as I do put myself in that very same camp, I do try to make content that spotlights the two when the opportunity comes to me. There still exists many great films that I do consider worth bringing up in the conversation. Almost too many to count. Mary and Max is a poignant stop motion animated film that goes over topics like loneliness, mental health, and the human condition in a uniquely touching and humorous way. Fantastic Mr. Fox is a brilliantly told story that tackles the themes of nature versus one's wants, the battle and eventual acceptance of what one can't change about themselves. And if we start talking about Laika and their catalog, we'd literally be here all day, with their movies like Kubo and the Two Strings being massively emotional arcs for their characters that I believe can only be viewed on the big screen. Point being that there is a lot to be appreciated with these mediums, and by far one of the biggest and most prominent examples of the stop motion medium as a whole has to be Aardman. From Shaun the Sheep to Chicken Run, Pirates to Sewer Rats, their movies bring a certain flavor of animation that you really can't find with any other studio. Their history of not just their movies but them as a whole is really interesting, and much like Jim Henson with The Muppets, feels like one that should be known as well as many other big studios. And by far one of their biggest successes has to be Wallace and Gromit. Love it or hate it, there's no Aardman without these two. The stories of this eccentric British inventor and his mute dog pretty much took the world by storm at one point or another. Their shorts like Wrong Trousers, A Close Shave, and Matter of Loaf and Death not only brought their fair share of excitement to the table, but massive acclaim as well. So much of this studio and stop motion's history is joined at the hip because of these two, and there's a pretty good reason why. And in this year of 2025, we were lucky enough to get the return of these two with their first feature film in 15 years, Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Fowl. And we have to ask ourselves, what could this movie have in store for our charming duo? Does this hold up well in a world far different from the days of 2005? Well, that's what we're here to find out. This is a movie that only exists because of a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and even a fractured partnership between Aardman and Dreamworks. So let's take a look at Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Fowl. Look, I know this video is supposed to be about these two, but in order to have a big picture idea of how much this movie means apart from just another Wallace and Gromit movie, it's important to know how they got their foot out the door with feature films in the first place. And our story begins with a man named Jeffrey Katzenberg. In the 90s, he worked at Disney, being one of the hands responsible for pulling them out of the dark ages and into their new era at the time, producing some of their most successful and acclaimed movies like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, you name it. These films are often credited with ushering in the Disney Renaissance, a period of renewed success for both the company's 2D department and the studio's animated features. But his time at the studio wasn't without its challenges. He had a complex relationship with the Disney CEO, Michael Eisner, and their disagreements eventually led to Katzenberg's departure from the company, especially when the position of second in command at Disney was up for grabs and Eisner decided to give it to none other than himself. It pretty much cemented the creation for one of the studio's biggest competitors, at least at the time. DreamWorks quickly established itself as very anti-Disney, not just in the way they would make their features, but in the way they would take the steps that Disney wouldn't. For example, Prince of Egypt, a movie that Eisner outright refused to greenlight for years, quickly proved to be one of the most well-received movies in their catalog, and this was just their first feature as a studio. In October of 1999, Aardman Animations, the renowned British studio behind Wallace and Gromit, signed a $250 million deal with DreamWorks to produce 5 films over a span of 12 years. Aardman was very successful, not only with music videos and commercials, but full-on animated shorts like the Academy Award-winning Creature Comfort. At the time, the studio was interested in dipping its toe into the feature film market, but didn't necessarily have the resources to do so. So this partnership was pretty much seen as a match made in heaven, combining Aardman's expertise in stop-motion animation with DreamWorks' resources and marketing flair. And with the deal finally sealed, their first movie, Chicken Run, would be released in 2000.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a wonderful audience.
Framed as an alternate take on prison escape movies like The Great Escape, Chicken Run brought a lot to the table in terms of Aardman's first feature film. A unique, diverse cast of characters, the villain, Mrs. Tweedy, being kind of brilliantly creepy at times, and the whole story being a pretty interesting take on the prison break genre as a whole. But I feel it's important to bring to light what this movie meant for not just DreamWorks, but Aardman as a whole. One of the biggest points of its identity was how far from the norm it was compared to other stop motion or even animated films at the time. But the biggest to point out was its dialogue.
Give over, you old fool. They just want to count us. Load of tripe.
And he's a Yank poppycock. Codswallop.
What did you do, you great pudding?
I didn't do ow.
Was that English?
Katzenberg defended the use of British slang in Chicken Run by stating that it gave the film character and an identity of its own. He acknowledged that while the slang might be unfamiliar to some audiences, it added charm and authenticity to the movie. And he believed that even if viewers didn't know the exact meaning of the slang, they could understand its context and appreciate its uniqueness. And being honest, I 100% see where he's coming from. Speaking from a personal point of view, I grew up on movies like these, and even though at the very beginning I never really understood the terms, over time it helped me understand and even become sort of a translator for both my European and American friends. And I got Aardman to thank for that. Despite Aardman's struggles being a small studio, Chicken Run remains to this day the highest grossing stop motion animated movie ever, beating out Fantastic Mr. Fox, Nightmare Before Christmas, and even any number of Laika movies. But before they could start production on the next movie, something changed as the 2000s kept chugging along. A move so effective in the company's success that it would change the way they would make feature films for a long time. It was Shrek. Shrek happened.
This is the part where you run away.
Thank you very much. I'm here till Thursday. Try the veal.
Shrek, while being a massive film, sort of shaped the way that DreamWorks as a studio would make movies from that point forward. Celebrity voices, trendy pop songs, pop culture references, dance party endings. Despite how you look at it, these are the things that worked, even when making its sequels like Shrek 2 and Shrek the Third, before kind of reeling it back with Shrek Forever After, and continued to work for a lot of DreamWorks' catalog that wasn't Shrek.
From the studio that brought you Shrek.
Yo, Angie needs to get her freak on. Come on, Ange. Dance with me, mama.
It's also worth to note that this was the beginning of a huge marketing giant for DreamWorks. When the movie came out, so did tons of merchandise, tie-ins with Burger King, cream pies, video games, toys. This was their big hit, and a lot of their other films had to change because of it. And unfortunately, these same aspects were going to affect the production of Aardman's own Wallace and Gromit.
Gotcha, thieving monster.
Wallace and Gromit are almost like Aardman's bread and butter. Their shorts like wrong trousers and a close shave have made them who they are. Like I mentioned in the intro, what this duo did for animation cannot be understated, and by 2005, they more than deserved the chance to charm the big screen too. Curse of the Were-Rabbit is one of those more fantastical movies in Aardman's catalog, reveling in science fiction and the straight-up absurdity of the situation more often than not. Despite being around for a while, this was the first time we had the two in an established area with more people other than just themselves from the shorts. But, due to the massive box office breaker that was Shrek, DreamWorks and Katzenberg especially decided to step in for some unneeded micromanagement. Changes were proposed from outright replacing Wallace's voice actor Peter Sallis with a younger, trendier one, and completely changing the story from the original title of The Great Vegetable Plot to something else in order to attract more of that sweet American audience. Even certain lines had to be redubbed for this very reason.
How is that prize marrow of yours coming on? How is that prize melon of yours coming on?
By all accounts, this proved to be one of the more stressful points in Aardman's history. The movie turned out great now, of course, but back then it was a full-on culture clash. That, alongside diminishing box office numbers and other factors brought to light in a video by YouTuber Edache, all changed things between the two studios after the release of their third movie, Flushed Away. That also bombed. Thankfully, Aardman was able to continue releasing more shorts and films outside of DreamWorks, working with Sony to produce Arthur Christmas and Pirates Band of Misfits, which both performed modestly, and making some fantastic works like Robin and the Shaun the Sheep franchise. But the beginning of the 2020s would mark the return to movies under Netflix: Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget in 2023, and Wallace and Gromit.
Vengeance! Most foul!
When compared to other sorts of media or even just content from Aardman as a whole, it's got pretty big shoes to fill. Curse of the Were-Rabbit wasn't just the duo's first feature, but one to take a lot of leaps in terms of how it's written, how it's presented, and what feats it did for Aardman as a whole. It cemented itself as a powerhouse for the studio, so safe to say Vengeance Most Foul had to be up there in terms of quality. That being said, there is a lot of things that Vengeance Most Foul does well. Plot-wise, it has one that hits really close to home, at least to me. We're introduced to a Wallace that's become too over-reliant on his technology and inventions, but shortly after making the nifty odd-jobbing robot, or Norbots for short, things go awry as the calculated Feathers McGraw from the wrong trousers returns and takes control of Norbot to steal back the blue diamond yet again. On paper, this would sound like a completely by-the-books, basic technology is evil kind of thing, but truly, I feel it goes deeper than that. Wallace, in the movie, has the most over-reliance on this stuff, fitting many Rube Goldberg-like machines in his house, replacing many of the different tasks he does on his own, much like AI. But from the way I see it, the movie gives a clever commentary on the way people have used the thing to replace all manner of tasks that we do by ourselves. And a clear message of the movie, again, at least to me, is not the full use of the stuff, but the assistance of it. Is not to use it as a full-on replacement, but to use it as an assistant. Much like how many people in the industry are struggling now because of this approach. Assistance, not substitution. But, like I keep saying, this is how I personally see the movie and its message. I could be wrong, of course, but there is a little beauty in seeing something spoken out like this from a medium where, no matter how many years pass, this style of animating will always remain the most time-consuming handmade animation there is. And that, to me, makes it all the more special.
AI, lad. See how embracing technology makes our life better? I mean, thanks to that handy device, we haven't had to use the old teapot for years.
All things considered, even though it's supposed to take place after The Wrong Trousers, this feels like a love letter to everything the duo have done up until this point. The motorcycle from A Close Shave? Here. References to the break-in from Wrong Trousers? Also here. A reference to the moon being made of cheese in their first ever short, A Grand Day Out? Oh yeah, it's definitely here. Appearances and cameos from characters that started off in Curse of the Were-Rabbit? Definitely here. Whether you see it as pandering or not, these feel like little awards for people who have enjoyed these shorts and movies, as well as giving the idea that the duo have been through a lot and have a lot of history behind them over 2 decades later. And I feel this and Chicken Run's sequels are prime examples of what you should and shouldn't do when making a sequel to some of your older movies. I understand that it can be difficult decision-wise, especially with bad actors in your projects who were good then but not so good now, but maybe if they attempted to do more of what they did here and less of what they did here, it would make whatever sequel they feel like making in the future a lot more enjoyable to people.
Behold, the dawn of the Nugget.
It's also in Here and Were-Rabbit, where these are the only 2 pieces of media starring these two that have them living in a full-on, lived-in town. All of the shorts showed them being in a town of sorts, yes, but with no people, most likely because of a lower budget. But with a bigger one, they were able to take the setting of Wallaby Street and have it filled with differently shaped and designed citizens, the uniqueness of their silhouettes being just as creative as Wallace's own. Granted, personally, I do enjoy the setting of the last movie a tiny bit more with Toddington Hall, but both of these movies pull this off really well. One of the biggest hurdles for this movie was both getting used to and the acting itself for Wallace's voice. For those who don't know, Peter Sallis passed away back in 2017, and since then for commercials, video games, and now this, we've been listening to Ben Whitehead taking over the role. He brings a new sort of youthful energy to Wallace. At first look, there's not much differentiating the two's work, but those with particularly good ears would notice that there's a sort of higher pitch going on with this version of Wallace. And it's not bad by any means. Actually, I welcome it.
I just think maybe Wallace has been unfairly portrayed as a crazed inventor.
Oh, this'll work a treat.
To a certain extent.
And by far, one of the biggest selling points for the movie as a whole is the return and sort of revival for one of the franchise's better written villains, Feathers McGraw. When I say silence can be deadly, I pretty much mean him. Much like Gromit, with zero dialogue, the movements of his actions and the sinister ways in which he performs them are strong enough to get across his motivations throughout both his appearances. And it's here where the draw of this being the spiritual sequel to The Wrong Trousers works the most. I gotta say, Were Rabbit has its fair share of dynamic angles and scenes, but Vengeance has the better action as a whole. There's just a lot more done here than the last movie, from the bike chase in Act 2 of the flick to the final chase scene between the two and Feathers and McGraw. It's been a good minute since we've seen these two actively working with one another to save the day, and it's presented here like so. But what I feel holds up the movie better than most is the heart of the film. One of the moments I've noticed in both this and Were Rabbit were the points where the characters were at their lowest. The shorts have this too, of course. But in these movies, there were moments of true blue vulnerability. Seeing a character like Wallace break down after realizing that he's out of options or is about to lose his best friend when he's almost always so cheery was unexpected for flicks like these, and something that you can't really find anywhere else when it comes to Aardman.
Thank goodness you're safe.
All right, break it up. This is a crime scene now.
All of these aspects together brought out the best in this movie more often than not. As you can tell in the title, I am of the belief that this movie saved Aardman in a way, and that's mostly because throughout their history of making features, they weren't ever quite able to reach the same heights as they did with DreamWorks. But now, years later, they prove that whatever they make, whether it be short, TV series, or another movie, has the ability to charm audiences much like they did back then. And I'll be happily excited for whatever comes next.